I've always wanted to go to Ireland, so I flew to Dublin and stayed in a hostel called Jacob's Inn downtown. It was the only bed I could find in Dublin under $100, and it was $98 for one night in a hostel in a room with 10 beds. I found out why when the bus from the airport was stuck in traffic. It was Pride weekend. We were, and the Pride parade was going throughout the downtown area. So that's how come all the hotel rooms were full. Also, my friend who I made on the subsequent tour told me that Ireland had taken in a lot of Ukrainian evacuees. It was hard to pay almost $100 for this bed. Now, it would have been okay, but there were 3 ladies from Russia who were there past midnight talking for half an hour, standing outside of their beds, talking in a regular voice, and then they were up at 5:30 doing the same thing. So I didn't get much sleep. So the second night I canceled my stay in this hostel, even though I couldn't get a refund, and I stayed at a hotel. I love local history, so the first thing I did was go to 14 Henrietta Street. It's a museum about the tenements where poor Irish families would live in the 1800s and 1900s even. One of my favorite books is Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. And actually I was listening to the audiobook of that while I was in Dublin. And he lived in a place like this. It used to be a beautiful Georgian mansion owned by one family. And then when they could no longer afford it, or the rich people moved out of town sort of and left the downtown area, then investors would buy this sort of a building and chop it up. And I don't know, I mean, dozens of families would live in this one place. And a whole family would be in one room, and let's say there might be one toilet on each floor, or sometimes less than that. This is a typical room of someone who would live there, and this could have housed a large family, or even 2 families in this space. The next morning, I joined a tour from Paddywagon Tours, and we went first to Belfast, Northern Ireland. Here's the tour group. Belfast was fascinating because they have such a tumultuous history. The Protestant and the Catholics fighting each other. They call it the Troubles. So this is a very high fence, and I asked the tour guide why it's still there if supposedly the Troubles ended, I don't know how many years ago, really 20 or 30 years ago, 30 years ago probably. And he said that part of the treaty that the groups agreed to was that it would only come down when both sides agreed. And it wouldn't be the government that decided, it would be the people who decided. And he said he doesn't think that it'll come down for 2 to 3 generations, which really came as a surprise. We then went to the Titanic Museum, which was interesting, but frankly wasn't as good as the traveling exhibit that I've seen in both Paris and San Francisco. But if you're in town, it's worth a visit. But I wouldn't go to Belfast just to see it. We then went on to other parts of Northern Ireland. We went to Dark Hedges, which was used as the King's Highway in the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones. I'm in a good old-fashioned Irish storm. Am I going the right way? Here's my new friend, Sandra. Hi. Hi. Sandra and I met the first second I sat in the bus. I sat next to her in the front seat, and we just made friends immediately, and we had just the greatest week together. It was so fun. She's from just outside of Dublin, so she was able to tell me a lot about Ireland, and we just had a great time. This was my introduction to the stormy Ireland. This is either the last week of June or the first week of July, so it was a surprise to have so much rain. Thank goodness I'd bought a raincoat in Brittany. We went from here to the King's Causeway, it's called, and this is beautiful but stormy. You talk about stormy. I've never been this wet in my life. In the olden times, to try and explain why it was so stormy, the people thought that there was a giant on their side and there was a giant on the other side, which just opposite this would be Canada, and that there were giants and they were like blowing back and forth at each other, mad at each other. It was so windy that walking down this hill, I had to walk on the inside of the road because it tried to blow me off, and I'm a heavy woman. We were so wet. Sandra and I went to the little hotel that was there and this is the only Irish coffee I had on my trip, and it was ever so delightful, and I was so incredibly wet. By the end of the day, I already had a cold. Sandra took such good care of me. She tucked me in the B&B that we stayed in that night in our room, and she tucked me in and went down to the local store to get me some cold medicine. That's what you call a good girlfriend. Thank you, Sandra. The next day we headed down to the Republic of Ireland and to the number one thing on my wish list, which were the Cliffs of Moher. And they were as impressive as I hoped they'd be. And of course, it was just very, very, very windy. I'd bought myself a new Irish wool scarf because I still had the bad cold. I just had the most delightful day here. We spent at least a couple hours here, and it was just mind-boggling how gorgeous it was. Some of the people went on a side trip on a boat to see this cave where they filmed Harry Potter and Dumbledore looking for the Horcrux in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. The last significant stop on our tour was Blarney Castle. I had never really wanted to go there, but it was surprisingly lovely, the gardens. Of course, it rained, as it did everywhere in Ireland, but it was absolutely beautiful, and I walked for a couple hours through the gardens, just saw a lot of beautiful things, original windows, which were incredible, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and I did stand under the Blarney Stone and look up, and I could see the hole where people would lean back, and I'm very glad I did not do that. This was a very fitting end to my 8 days in Ireland. My trip to Ireland was everything that I hoped it would be. Thanks for watching. Ciao.